We learnt yesterday about the sad passing of Pele, aged 82. Edson Arantes do Nascimento, to give him his full title. No real shock to anyone. He'd been ill for some time, and I think it was news that we knew were coming, but it's still a sad day for football to lose one of the greats. Now, when I was a younger lad, I was too young to have seen Pele play. He'd been retired probably 10, 15 years before I started really taking a huge interest in football. But it was a name that I used to hear all the time. All the time. PE teachers would talk about it. My dad would talk about it. Now, my dad don't rave about anybody, but would rave about Pele because of the balance he'd got. Could shoot with either foot, powerful in air, strong physically, at a time when defenders could go in and leave you looking like Douglas Bader and not even get a yellow card. It talk about how he used to float across the horrific pitches back in those days, and the impact he had at the World Cup as a 17-year-old. And that's my dad, who don't rave about anybody. I can remember going to my mate's house, Paul. I went and knocked on the door, and his dad answered. I said, "Who's Paul coming out?" "Come in, son. You know what he's like. Take him half an hour, put his shoes on." So I'm just stood there in the kitchen. His dad says, "Go and watch Wednesday on Saturday." I went, "Oh, yeah. How did they do, son?" I went, "Oh, they were marvellous, 3-1. "Oh, who scored?" "David Hurst got a double. I think he might be the best player in the world." And he was stood at sink, and he looked at me, and he went, "When he scored 1,000 goals like Pele, son, come back, we'll have a chat." And I can remember stood there going, 1,000 goals? Your brain can't comprehend it, can it? So his name was always there. I mean, when I was 15, I couldn't get in junior teams. It was just one of those things about the 80s. Couldn't get in junior teams, too small, son. But I was playing for adult men's side because coaches of pub teams or whatever, like, "Oh, you can play a bit, son, come play for me." So I'm in dressing rooms at 15 with blokes who are 30, 32, 33. And they've watched him play and they remembered him. And in training sessions and stuff, anyone who got up and did a towering leaping header at goal, this ain't net Pele. So it was around, it was a name that you always heard. Now, today is different. You can find any clip of any player. There's YouTube and Twitter and TikTok and everything. There's so much you can get. But in them days, there just weren't that visual information around, so you had to go looking. So I used to get books because my interest had been piqued by my dad raving about him, who never raves about anybody. My mate's dad, 1,000 goals. But old blokes I talked to, PE teachers, everybody. And even when I was older, when I was in the pub, I used to read about it all the time. There'd be all the rows about Maradona and Pele going on. So I'd get books, and there were stuff you get. Telegraph used to do a yearbook. They were always on about Pele in it. Charles Buchan, I don't know if you remember those books, if you're old enough. Charles Buchan football annuals, used to get them. And it collect stuff from second-hand shops and get these things. And Rothman's International book. So I couldn't really get any, visuals on him, but I was poring over this information because I couldn't believe his stats. Now, the only time in them days that really you got to see any of the great players, because football wasn't wall-to-wall on TV. You might get one game a week if you were lucky, and that was domestic football. So it was only the World Cup every 4 years. And those opening titles on the World Cup used to, encapsulate everything that was great about the game, and they used to draw you in. And I'd be pointing at them, "Dad, who's that?" "Oh, that's Puskas." "Who's that? Who's that?" And they were magical. And they were the only times you'd see little clips of these great players. It's evocative, really, isn't it? That's what it chimes something in your mind, a romanticism about the game. And as I got a bit older, I managed to get hold of some VHS tapes. You're laughing now, I'm showing my age, but VHS tapes. So I'd got various videos. The Great English Entertainers, so a video with like Stan Bowles and Rodney Marsh and George Best and Frank Worthington. And I got one, and it was World Cup Heroes. And it's the first time I'd ever seen any proper footage of Pele. And I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe some of the stuff that he were doing. Tricks that you see now, tricks that players have named after them. But he was doing them 30, 40 years ago, and now, fortunately with the internet, there's loads of footage out there that you can see, and you can see various turns and tricks that he's doing, going, "Oh, well, so-and-so did that, and they got it named after him." All these little things. But on these on this VHS tape, there was two things that really stood in my mind. And it wasn't all the goals. It wasn't the header, the leaping salmon header. The first thing that stuck out for me was the goal. When I say the goal, you'll know which one I mean. It's 1970, Brazil against Italy, Carlos Alberto. And you'll all remember the build-up. They're all doing flicks and tricks and bits of pace and shimmying round men and taking players on. And then it goes out to the far side and Carlos Alberto arrows that ball outside at boot, low and hard into far corner. Fantastic goal, probably one of the best goals of all time. But the bit I kept rewinding, and I couldn't believe, was in the middle of all that, was Pele with that final layoff. Because for all the skills and all the thrills and tricks and everything else in that wonderful goal, he was the bit that I would just... Because he just takes the ball, turns and makes a 5-yard pass, and it's a pass that anybody who's ever kicked a ball could make. But I think that's the genius of it, because when you look at that clip, when the ball comes into him, the defender's low and he's coming in, what's he going to do, what's he going to do? And he's expecting him to try and do something. And that is the genius of football, is knowing when and where. That ball goes in now to a player, probably the last World Cup we've just seen. That player will try and do something, he'll try and get inside, he'll try and beat him. We see it all the time with young players, they'll beat one man, beat two. They don't put cross in, they'll try and beat third man and lose possession. He just took the ball there, turned, even has a touch with his other little foot just to sit and even more. Just casually lays out a 5-yard pass into Alberto's path and bang. And honestly, I will like that with remote. Just an aura of calmness amongst all that move, the flicks and the tricks, and it's all a whirling dervish in there, all players all over the place. And always in that bright hue that you got with that old footage. And he's just calmness like a mill pond in the middle. Touch, touch, pass. Casual. I loved that clip. My other favourite thing, my favourite bit of footage, not one of his 1,000 goals, which it could be any of them, and go and have a look, there's plenty out there to look at. But it's actually a miss. It's a miss. It's a ball that goes through. The reason I love it is because, again, it's not about technique. It's not about skills or doing rabonas or any of that. It's about brain. That's why it stands out, because he runs, the keeper thinks he's going to take it round him, and he steps over it and lets it go through. And he gets round the other side, and he misses it. And you know what, even when I watch that clip now, I'm still willing that ball to go in. I know it's not going to. I know it's just going to bobble wide of that post. It looks like it's punctured. I know it's going to go wide, but I'm still willing it to go in. Because of the intelligence of the move. Don't even touch it. That's a sign. And that piqued me. I saw that and it was one of my favourite moves I'd ever seen. And as a young lad, that's what you want. You want things that inspire you to try things. And I became determined I was going to score that goal. And it took me about 7 years, but I eventually did it. So in the schoolyard, I thought, I'm going to score that goal one day. Now you're reliant on someone playing that ball into you. And it never came, and it never came. And I'd try it in school matches, try it in playground. Even when I went to comprehensive school, I'd try it in Sunday league games. I'm just waiting and waiting. And then one day, I scored it. And I can remember exactly where it was. It was up at Istow School, backfield, Sunday league training session. And somebody played that exact ball and I'd made that run. And you know when your eyes light up and you think, this is it. And it came and I stepped over it, keeper came out, I went round and I put it in between jumpers for goalposts. And then I went off alarming. I went absolutely crazy. I couldn't believe I'd actually done it after 7 or 8 years of training. I was like, I've done it, I've done the Pele goal. I almost felt, after all that training, like I'd done it for him. Of course, it's just a training session, so what lads are... So, but you dickhead, it's only 4-2. It's only a training session. You're still 2 goals behind, but they didn't know what had been going on in my head for this 7 years, desperately trying to create this perfect replica of the Pele goal, but put it back in there. And that's what it's all about. That's what the great players do. They inspire you as a young kid to go out, I'm going to try that, I'm going to try that. And that's what great players produce other great players, because you want to be like that. You want to copy that. You want to try them tricks. You want to try them flicks. You want to try all those skills. And great players create other great players. If there's no Pele, there's probably no Rivaldo or Ronaldinho. If there's no Ronaldinho at Barcelona, maybe Messi influenced in the way he is. So great players create other great players, and they're an inspiration to kids. That's what it's all about. It's a sad day that we've lost Pele, but it should be a day of great celebration for one of the greatest players that ever lived. Pele, the original. Rest in peace.